everyone. I am Dr. Kshitija, a DM medical geneticist from AIIMS New Delhi, and I currently serve as a consultant clinical geneticist at Apollo Hospitals, Navi, Mumbai. On behalf of Organization of Rare Diseases India, ORDI, it is my pleasure to warmly welcome you all to another knowledge-packed session of the Rare Info Series. ORDI continues to be a beacon of hope and a vital resource in the rare disease community. The platform they provide is more than just a meeting place. It's a dynamic ecosystem that fosters collaboration and empowers all stakeholders, clinicians, researchers, patients, and their families to learn from each other. This shared understanding is the very foundation upon which we can build a better diagnostic pathway, care protocols, and support systems. A quick note for everyone, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on ORDI's YouTube channel. When we say rare diseases, we often think they affect very few, but collectively they impact millions of individuals and families in India and worldwide. This makes our collective mission not just important but urgent. While we have seen remarkable advances with therapies like enzyme replacements and pioneering gene therapies, the journey has just begun. There is a vast need for more research, more clinical trials, and more innovative treatments to bring hope to those waiting. This is precisely why we are here today to discuss the very engine that drives these innovations, clinical trials. And to guide us through this complex yet crucial topic, we are truly privileged to have an exceptional expert with us. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Dr. Sudheendra Rao. Dr. Rao is a senior medical safety advisor with over 22 years of extensive experience spanning clinical sciences, biotech R&D, and healthcare delivery. A physician scientist by training, he holds both an MD and a PhD in neurosciences with postdoctoral expertise in spinal cord injury and gene therapy. His unique career includes leadership roles such as Chief Scientific Officer at a cell therapy startup where he spearheaded initiatives from bench to bedside. Dr. Rao's core expertise lies in reviewing clinical trial data, ensuring regulatory compliance, and advancing therapies for neurological disorders. He is deeply passionate about solving unmet medical needs through strategic collaborations and building research ecosystems to bring next-generation therapies to patients. Let's welcome Dr. Rao, who will now take us through the topic, clinical trials for rare diseases, the basics and the latest development. A note to those attending, we will be taking questions at the end of the session, so you can type your questions in the Q&A session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kshitija, for that introduction. Hi everyone. So I want to keep this particular webinar I will try to keep it as simple as possible. I want to give an overview of clinical trial. So majorly you will see that a lot of slides will talk about what clinical trial is, what are the aspects of clinical trial, and as and when during those slides I will talk about as and when I am going to going through those slides, I am going to talk about rare diseases, and in the end I will talk a little bit on the rare disease specific latest developments, and also of course no story is complete without artificial intelligence, so I'm going to talk a little bit on artificial intelligence in the clinical trial as well. So that is what I hope to do. And how much time we have, Dr. Kshitija?
We have about 50 minutes, 45 to 10
Okay.
minutes. We can take questions in the
Okay.
last 10 minutes.
Okay. So please give me a reminder if I overshoot by
Sure, sir.
4:45. Thank you.
Sir.
So please let me know whether you guys can see my slides.
Yes, sir. The slides are visible, sir, and in full screen.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Okay. So we are going to talk about clinical trials for rare diseases, basics and latest development. So first we will talk about the basics aspect, because whenever we see clinical trials, sometimes people kind of understand
Excuse me,
different things.
Sudheendra. Why is this echoing? Is there any other is open nearby you?
Nothing else is open nearby me.
Okay, because the
Sir,
voice
I'm
is
able to hear, sir, clearly.
okay, then fine. Yeah.
Okay, good. So is anybody having issue? Maybe they can put it in the chat. Should we go ahead?
Yes, sir. I think it's
Okay,
fine. The
it's fine.
audio is
Okay,
fine, sir.
okay, thank you. So, so this is important that we try to understand what are we talking about, because um, the concept of clinical studies means experimental studies involve different things. So first maybe there would be something like observational study, wherein people are trying to without any intervention, they are trying to observe certain things, either in a case versus a control, or a group of patients, or then you do a cross sectional survey and all these things. So these are generally called observational studies, where the intervention is not actively sought out for. On the contrary, there is something called real world studies, which are also sometimes they have observational value, but they generally involve what is called electronic data sources, which are typically other than the medical records, like your wearable data, or from insurance data. This kind of real world data that is being collected, the medical data is there everywhere, so those things are used. Those are part of observational real world studies. But what we are going to talk about is the interventional studies or experimental studies, wherein you have where that is what we call as a clinical trial per se. And it can be classified on based on different phases, what is the purpose of the study, what type of study design is there. And in case of real world study, there are some pragmatic interventions as well, like there is a flexibility in care. Rare disease patient comes, and sometimes the different patients need to be treated by different methods. A spinal muscular atrophy case gets admitted for gene therapy trial. In the meanwhile, they might have a respiratory infection that needs to be treated a little bit differently. All those things need to be captured, and sometimes it is not possible to capture all type of intervention methodologies in the protocol, so there needs to be some sort of flexibility, inclusion exclusion criteria flexibility into the study, like which patient will get included into study, who will get excluded from the study. When you're doing that in the real world scenario, you might not have the very strict rigid guidelines that you generally follow in a clinical trial setup. And there will be variations in terms of the care provided to the patient, because the clinical practice varies. One kind of doctor provides the care in a one particular manner, another provides care in another manner. So all these kind of things are not accounted for, whereas in a clinical trial per se, there is a specific investigator. The investigator has to follow a protocol, and the care needs to be provided accordingly. So these kind of variations are there when we talk about clinical trial in the standard concept vis-a-vis the clinical trial that happens in a real world concept. So that is what we are talking about, but we are going to focus more on the experimental or interventional clinical trial. But I want to take a step back, because what is associated with this clinical trial is is a bunch of decisions by different people, and that is what we call as a drug development process. So a sponsor or somebody who is interested in understanding disease and treating it, they would do some sort of discovery and develop a molecule for intervention, and that would go through a preclinical research, wherein animals or non-animal models are tested. They're tested for safety, efficacy, all kind of different parameters. An approximate dose also will be found, and then that molecule will proceed to the clinical research. And once the clinical research is finished, it will go to the regulatory bodies. In CDSCO is there in India, in US it is US FDA, in Europe it is EMA, like that. Different regulatory bodies are there in different countries. Some of them have harmonized a regulatory review process, some of them don't. But then once the regulatory review says okay, the process will move towards what is called as post marketing safety monitoring. So once the drug is in the market, it is not like they have forgotten about it. They have to constantly monitor. That's where the pharmacovigilance comes in, and you are constantly looking at any other new safety signals that are emerging from the drug while it is in a real world scenario. So this is more like a circle, not a straight arrow. Constant monitoring, sometimes some extra benefits also will be observed, like minoxidil, where it was developed for hypertension, then they found out that it actually increases the hair growth, then they made a new formulation so that minoxidil could be used for alopecia. disease. So these it's more like a cycle, and this particular drug development process, but we are focusing on the clinical research aspect of this particular drug development cycle. And the main principle behind all the clinical research is what we call as good clinical practice. India has its own GCP, GCP India, but then there are organizations like ICH, the International Harmonization Council for Harmonization, where there are some set standard rules which talk about ethical conduct, different protocol compliance, and all these different words would mean the same for everybody, whether they are in USA or in Europe or in Japan or in UK. So that is the whole concept of clinical practice, ensuring that the patient safety is put on the top priority, but at the same time, a standard set of harmonized rules are followed. So this is the central pillar for a good clinical trial. But when we talk about clinical trial and rare diseases, we should know what are we actually talking about. So to define clinical trial, I would say it would be a sponsor led systematic study. Sponsor is somebody who is responsible for conduct of the clinical trial, management of the clinical trial, and then reporting of the clinical trial to appropriate agency. So that is a sponsor. It could be a pharmaceutical company, could be an academia who is interested in understanding a drug, could be anybody who is responsible for that, because sponsor has to take responsibility in conducting clinical trial. So it would be a systematic study. That means it would have a method of recruiting the patient, a method of testing the patient, and understanding when to stop the trial, and all those things. It contains multiple different stages, but it should be conducted on consented humans, means people who have provided consent, people who have provided informed consent. So they need to be provided document in an understandable manner, and then once they understand these consents, understand the process of the clinical trial, what is the benefit, what is the risk, whether it is going to help them or not. And sometimes, especially in case of rare diseases, because they are common in children, we need to have legal appointed people who are going to help make the decisions for them. And rare diseases in children being vulnerable population, one needs to be very clear of benefit and risk, and what type of study one is conducting, what type of intervention, and what is the standard of care, and whether the current treatment is actually adding any benefit to that or not. Now, doing all these studies, we are going to collect data, and the data can come from clinical outcomes, clinical assessments. There could be pharmacological data that is collected, pharmacodynamic, pharmacokinetic data. Then adverse event information, means events or outcomes that might or might not be related to the drug, but nevertheless happen during the course of the study. Those informations are collected, and a safety profile of that particular drug is created. And at the end of the study, we would also know, depending on the phase of the study, we will know whether the drug has been useful in what it wanted to achieve. All these concepts are captured in what is called as clinical trial protocol, and these clinical trial protocol and other clinical trial related documents, they come under ethics committee watch. So either it could be an institutional ethics committee registered in India, for example with the Department of Health Research, or it could be a commercial ethics committee, ethics committee which overlooks which has an oversight on the commercial drug development, which should be registered with the CDSCO in Government of India. There are other IRBs and things like that. Different similar concepts are there in different countries. Having said that, when we talk about rare diseases per se, we know that you would have probably heard by now that rare diseases are individually rare, but then collectively they are very common. The current proposed UNGA proposal is that in any WHO region, anything less than 1 is to 2000 incidents should be at least looked into whether it could be a rare disease or not. Of course, there would be a region to region variation, like malaria is going to be endemic in India, could be rare in certain parts of the world. Now, How many rare diseases are there? More than 10,000 actually, 10,400 ish, and more than 450 have formally been documented in India. Um, that was Professor I.C. Verma's paper. Afterwards, we don't know how many are there, but at least 200. To I myself have seen 200 different rare diseases. So, how many people are there probably in India? Around 51 to 86 million rare disease patients are estimated to be in India, and more than 400 million worldwide. And around 70 to 80% of them are children, and substantial adults are also there. Adult rare diseases are also there. It is not that adults are not rare diseases are there. There is something like frontotemporal dementia, 81 antitrypsin, and antithyroid antibody, anti-amyloid antibody issues. Multiple different types of rare diseases in the adults are also there. Around 72% of these rare diseases, 72 to 80% maximum, do have some sort of known genetic causes. It could be monogenic disorder, could be multi polygenic disorder, complex traits are there, and multisystemic involvement is very common in case of rare diseases. And generally, they take around 5 years for the diagnosis. And misdiagnosis is an extremely common phenomena. That is the reason why organizations like Organization for Rare Diseases India, they have rare disease care coordination center in different centers of excellence for rare diseases, so that the journey of the rare disease patient from the diagnosis to the treatment can be as smooth and as possible. And the drugs which are treating the rare disease drugs are called the orphan drugs. And so when we talk about clinical trial for rare diseases, we are actually talking about clinical trial of the orphan drugs. Now now we go to how are these clinical trials actually classified. So it's like, I can classify based on the treatment. If I'm giving some different type of interventions, some treatments, I can classify the clinical trials based on the treatment. What are those kind of treatments, we will see in the next few slides. Then there could be some sort of behavioral interventions also in clinical trial. Might not directly work for rare diseases, might work for some sort of cerebral palsy involvement, trials in cerebral palsy, or mental disorders. There could be some behavioral interventions. One example I have put here is mindfulness based stress reduction, or MBSR trial, where people were provided normal treatment, along with some people were provided mindfulness treatment as an addition, as an adjuvant, and that is a behavioral intervention. But again, it depends on how you see the issue. Some, you can actually say that behavioral intervention is also a type of intervention. So treatment through a medicine, a small molecule, or a biological, or a gene therapy, or a cell therapy is also an intervention. Behavior is also an intervention. So it depends on how you look at it. Sometimes it is possible to also do the clinical trial with the prevention as the main focus. So here I have given an example where aspirin was used in one trial called Aspri, wherein elderly patients were recruited, and some were provided standard of care, some were provided an addition of aspirin, and then they tried to look at what are the different kind of events that happen in people who take aspirin vis-a-vis those who didn't take aspirin. So they had to follow them up for a long time, and then they understood that aspirin actually reduces certain types of cardiovascular events. And sometimes clinical trials we also need to see, we are also done as a screening clinical trials. Say for example here, low dose helical CT versus chest x-ray. This is one type of screening trial. This is, again, you can see that the prevention, screening, all these are type of interventions only. And here the example I'm trying to give you is the low dose helical CT versus chest X-ray. So for lung cancers, generally we also always try to look at chest X-ray to find out whether there are any lesions in the chest. It is also possible to do the same thing using a low dose helical CT. Now, so you can recruit a group of people, and then for a few of them you provide only chest X-ray for as a screening methodology, and low dose helical CT as a screening methodology. You can recruit, say, high risk patients or regular patients, and then try to see whether in which particular cohort you are able to actually see diagnosis of the lung cancer, or a mass in the lung. And they found out that low dose helical CT was able to actually pick up much earlier And of course, if you keep the outcomes as death, the people who actually underwent low dose helical CT, they actually had a better survival as compared to those who just underwent chest X-ray. Of course, during the course of the trial, they also figured out that you cannot keep on putting people under low dose helical CT, because it is basically X-rays at a larger dose. So they had to understand the toxicity of the low dose helical CT. They understood a lot of other things about low dose helical CT, what should be the frequency, how much they need to give, and things like that. So that is the kind of trial called screening clinical trial. But again, as you see, screening, prevention, behavioral can also be clubbed under treatment. Then there are clinical trials which concentrate on the diagnostics aspects of it, wherein index test versus gold standard test. Like for example, during the COVID test, we know that real-time PCR is the standard test, and then this regular PCR test came. So we had to actually benchmark the regular PCR test or index test under the gold standard real-time PCR, and then there were other kind of tests also came. So these again are type of interventions only, and sometimes we don't have to do an intervention like a screening test or a blood test or a treatment. Sometimes quality of life intervention itself is also used. Suppose in case of Duchenne muscular dystrophy patients, whether it is possible to provide some quality of care by providing regular respiratory care, or in case of cancer, whether additional palliative care is going to improve the quality of life or not. So these are different kinds of clinical trials when you try to classify them by purpose. Then there is another method that you want to classify them by the design. So if you have a control group, means one group doesn't get anything, or gets a standard treatment, and another group gets the treatment. So you can actually have a design like that, or you can have completely uncontrolled, means there is no treatment that they are getting other than what they are usually they get. So you can have a control group or an uncontrolled group, or sometimes if the standard of care is already including something which is already targeting the particular disease, then you are comparing the previous treatment or a standard of care treatment with a new treatment, that is your new molecule that you want to test. In case of method of allocation, you can recruit the patients and then randomize them to one group which gets treatment or doesn't get the treatment, or one gets a placebo and another one doesn't get the placebo. So this kind of randomized and non-randomization of method of allocation, that is another method of doing the clinical trial classification by design. The third one is whether the group is aware what they are receiving. Open label means the person who is taking, the patient who is taking the drug, the doctor who is giving the drug, and the analyst who is analyzing the data, all of them are aware what is being provided to them. Open label is almost most of the common designs that we see in rare diseases because it has ethical challenges. You don't you want you know that the patient numbers are very low, so it's very ethically challenging to kind of randomly subject them to a placebo group vis-a-vis a treatment group, because you know that placebos don't work and the patient is very critical and you have this ethical dilemma. So in that case, open label are kind of commonly preferred design for rare diseases, and especially for phase 3, phase 4, we'll come to that. Open label is commonly used, everybody knows. But then you have something called blinding. So blinding means one of them doesn't know what is being given. So in single blinded study, the patient doesn't know what is being given. The patient might be getting a placebo or a rare disease drug, or it could be double blinded where the patient also doesn't know, the treating doctor also doesn't know that whether the patient is getting treatment or a placebo. And triple blinding, wherein the patient doesn't know, the treating doctor doesn't know, and the analyst also doesn't know whether who is receiving what. So these are different kind of designs depending on, I mean, like, yeah, it also depends on how sure you are, how sure you want to actually get whether the product is safe or efficacious. And it also depends on the disease that you're working with. It also depends on the regulatory rigor that is being asked for. That whenever you are providing some sort of data, there needs to be 100% dependence, 100% believability that that particular treatment is going to work. And that is where the next thing comes in, that is called intervention outcome. Depending on that, there is something called an equivalence study. There is already a standard of care, and you have introduced a new molecule, and this particular new molecule, you expect, your hypothesis is that you expect it is going to work as good as the molecule which is already there in the market. So that is called as equivalence study. Or non-inferiority, this is again the same equivalence study, but you are looking at it in a different way. Say for example, the drug which is already present in the market has a certain amount of negative side effects, and you want to come up with something similar, but you are saying that it is non-inferior in the sense that maybe it is not as good as the one that is there, but definitely it is having some lesser side effects as compared to what is already there. So that way you will say that it is not inferior in case of efficacy, but of course safety wise or in terms of adverse events there is a little bit of improvement, like the kind of things that we see, right, wherein gastric tablets, if you take it, then there are these sustained release tablets, or intestinal dissolving, those kind of tablets, wherein you are saying that these particular tablets will decrease the side effects which are present in the gastric area, because the drug is not getting dissolved there, it is getting dissolved in the intestinal area. So that way you are not saying that your drug is great, but you are definitely saying that the current vis-a-vis the current treatment, you are having much lesser side effects. So those kind of things are called non-inferiority interventions. And superiority intervention is you are claiming that the drug that you are testing is definitely better than what is being already offered to the patient. Then based on the designs, there could be some specific designs, parallel design, crossover, factorial. There are a lot of them like this. I mean, there is no end to these kind of specific design. It's a huge ocean. Whoever is interested in understanding them, definitely I will ask them to go through FDA websites. There are a lot of information that are available, or I don't want to go into these nitty gritty or very specific details that are there. But definitely there are very different types of designs that are available for the clinical trial. Now we'll go to the clinical trials that are classified by phases. This is constant, this is what generally we always hear. There is this phase 1 clinical trial which is mainly focused on safety. They want to find the dose because the drug has just come off from the preclinical studies. They know that from the mouse studies, this is the kind of dose that one should use in humans. It is possible to do an approximation, but then again you got to test it, and until unless you see how it does in the human, it is still a hypothesis, right? So you want to do that particular preliminary testing, that is called phase 1, where you are looking at the safety profile of the drug, and then you want to find an appropriate dose that should be used in humans. And of course, because we are in case of rare diseases, you are working with elderly population sometimes, or you're working with children who might or might not have a very good metabolism as compared to the regular children that are there. So it is not possible to extrapolate unless we actually do that in the clinical trial setting. And the second thing is the phase 2 clinical trials, where we are looking majorly at the efficacy of the molecule, and we are also looking at the adverse events. Now adverse events are events that generally happen during the clinical trial, might or might not be related to the drug. This is everything that can happen. The patient took the medicine, 10 days later patient had a running nose. Now running nose is an adverse event, it might or might not be related with the drug per se. Then one needs to look at the causality and then make an understanding of it. So efficacy means whatever outcome parameters that the patient is expected to have. Say for example, in case of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, it is one of the outcome parameters is if you take the drug, and then if you are doing a 6-minute walk test, your endurance for that walk should increase. If you are climbing the stairs, the number of steps you climb or the way you climb all those things will improve. So these are some of the outcome parameters they are looking. It could be very obvious outcome parameters. Sometimes the outcome parameters are molecular. They are looking at whether the dystrophin expression is improving or not, whether these biomarkers are improving or not, whether CRP levels are decreasing or not. So there are different types of outcome measures that one is looking at in phase 2 trial, sometimes in phase 1 as well. But that is what the phase 2 majorly focuses on. In case of phase 3, once you know that your product is safe, or it has at least a safety profile, you know the extent and the spectrum of its safety profile, you know the extent of its efficacy profile, you want to expand the number of people who are getting that particular treatment. And then you are looking at again efficacy, and this time you are also specifically looking for monitoring adverse reactions. Now adverse reaction, the difference between reaction and an event is that in adverse reaction there is a probability that the event that you are seeing has some sort of causal association with the molecule that you are testing. So you are anyway, you in a small group or a small cohort, you looked at the phase 2. In phase 2, in a small cohort, you looked at what are the different kind of adverse events and what could be possibly causally linked to the molecule. And when you're recruiting a larger group, you are looking at what are the different types of adverse events that are again causally linked. This way you will get a broad understanding of the safety and the adverse events that can probably happen when the drug is provided to them, right? And these adverse reactions, they are the ones which make it to the labels. When you buy a drug, you actually get a label. Most of us don't read it, but that's an important document that needs to be read, because it contains all the adverse events and also possible adverse reactions that could happen. Like for example, if you are taking some of the medicines, immunological medicines for polygyra, some of the rare immunological joint disorders, it is possible that when you're infusing the drug, you might get an adverse reaction, and adverse reaction might involve increase in the blood pressure, difficult to breathe, your pupils might dilate, fever might come, some of the blood parameters will change. All these kind of things are already noted down in that particular level. Those things will make it in phase 3. And phase 4 is once this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 data is combined and provided to the regulatory agencies, they make a decision whether to approve this particular drug for a broader prescription or not. So far, the drug has been in the clinical trial, and as far as the drug is in the clinical trial, you cannot charge the patient for it. Nobody should charge the patient while the drug is in the clinical trial. This is an essential thing of the ethics as well. You cannot get medical medicines from the patients. Sometimes we see that in countries like India or other places, some people talk about stem cells which they want to give to the rare disease patients, and then they charge them. First of all, stem cell treatments are not approved for most of the rare diseases. Whatever is approved is there in the national policy for rare diseases. And they also charge these patients for the treatment that is actually not approved. That is completely unethical, immoral, all those things. But as long as the drug is in the clinical trial, nobody should charge for it. Once they approve, the regulators, once they approve these particular drugs, then these drugs are called market authorized drugs. Once the drug gets into the market, then it is available for prescription. So your doctor can actually write prescription saying that, hey, this patient seems to be say might get benefited from this particular treatment, so I want to give this treatment. Now you will then this particular drug will be available at your pharmacy. You can go to your Aushadhi areas and then get this drug. So that's what the thing is. But then the drug development cycle doesn't stop there. That's where the phase 4 is. Sometimes we have to monitor the drug, because you are now putting the drug in a larger population. You now have data from population, so you want to get the population level safety information, you want to get the population level efficacy information, because the patient who is taking your drug is also taking 100 other drugs. Sometimes they are going to take a paracetamol, sometimes they are going to take something else. So you are mix matching everything while you are doing the clinical trial. In a clinical trial site, you are in control of everything. But once the drug gets into the market, you don't have control over it. So you want to get population level safety, population level efficacy, and this is the real world information that we get. But when it comes to rare disease, we also see that there are a lot of other types of trials that come. There's something called mixed phase trials, right? That's because I'll come back to this slide a little bit later. That's because there are challenges in the rare disease clinical trials. Because once you want to do a rare disease clinical trial, the first question one would ask is, where is the patient? What is the disease? How many patients are there? Because this is the most common question. We also get from a lot of contract research organizations or companies. They are in search of this patient. One company wanted to do on and they have some interesting inclusion criteria. They are in search of very specific patients who are having thalassemia, and who are not having iron overload, and they are also not transfusion dependent, like that. Those kind of different types of inclusion criteria will be there. Where is that patient? Who is handling that patient? So one need to help get these patients, or find out where they are, and how many they require, and things like that. This is where the you know an ecosystem where patient advocacy groups, patient organizations work with the clinical doctors will come to help, because they can come to patients and patients would know, hey, I went to that doctor is treating. And then like that you can actually check out how many doctors are treating one particular disease, and then we can find out which patient, how many patients are there for what particular disease. And also there is this issue of consensus on the diagnosis. Right now, that is the reason why most of the rare disease trials are all genetic based. They want to know, this particular gene should be mutated, and then this particular mutation is what they are looking for. That is becoming very common now. But then again, some rare diseases might not be completely genetic, or there could be some polygenic component to it. So there needs to be a consensus on the particular diagnosis. And also the disease progression varies. There is a huge amount of genetic heterogeneity, and this is again one of the recent gene therapy, gene editing, the CRISPR-Cas product that was recently approved, Casgv. If you look at the documents, we know that they actually tried to do this particular trial for both. Um, they tried to do one second, one second. They tried to do clinical trial for both hemophilia and thalassemia, and they couldn't actually convince the regulators, because there was variation in the efficacy that they saw in case of thalassemia patients. So that is the problem, because the disease actually progresses differently. The disease responds differently in different people. And the rare disease, there are very small patient population. You cannot recruit a huge number of patients and then try to do a statistical study there. With whatever available patient, one needs to work. So it becomes a very challenging issue for clinical study design and statistical analysis. And there could be other coexisting illnesses which are present in the patients. So, and these patients need to be provided appropriate information on the balance, risk and benefit, right? And the risk of acceptance and the clinic ethics of because most of the rare disease patients are what I would say, they are ready to enroll into a clinical trial, at least when given a chance. But then that kind of is a thing, because they might actually say, they might not actually look at the risk in a very serious manner, as compared to people who are not that desperate, right? Because most of the rare diseases, more than 95% of them don't have an appropriate treatment. So when you're offering a clinical trial, risk acceptance might be very high in case of rare disease patients. That is the reason ethics committees which are evaluating the protocols for the rare diseases need to be very, very careful, and there's need to stick to the national ethics guidelines. And then you have natural history of the disease, because you want to know when to intervene for a rare disease trial, because every disease has an appropriate therapeutic window. In that appropriate therapeutic window, some type of treatments are possible, and some types of treatments are not possible. So to know that, one needs to know what is the natural history of the disease. in a regulatory useful manner, or in a clinical trial useful manner. Most of the times we do know how the disease progresses, but whether the like what are the different types of the outcome measures that happen throughout the disease. So we need to have some sort of quantifiable outcomes which are noted down throughout the natural history of the disease. So for that we would need an appropriate registries. Most of the rare diseases don't have registries. So what happens is whoever is in charge of the development of the molecule has to do the registry. And who will do it for them? I mean, most of the times they either do that as a initial study, right? So before even starting a clinical trial for a particular molecule, they would probably work with some patient organization to start doing a registry. That is generally how most of the times done, but it can be much better, I would say. So this is the reason why there needs to be some sort of improved designs which need to be utilized in clinical trials. So these are called hybrid or mixed phase trials. So since it is not possible to kind of recruit one group of patients for phase one group of patients for phase two, so phase one and phase two can be combined together. It's called high risk and high reward. And generally the study also includes something called dose escalation. So they start with some small dose and then slowly increase the dose, and then find out whether the safety parameters are changing or not. Then they have phase two, phase three, hybrid trials or mixed phase trials. Multiple treatment arms are there. So and different doses are used for different types of arms. Arms means a group of patients who are receiving one type of treatment. And there is a selected treatment arm of the standard of care. So after some time there will be a predefined interim analysis checkpoint. They will they will recruit the patient. They will put them into a different group for different doses, and then they already know a predefined checkpoint. They will analyze the data. That's called interim analysis. And once the interim analysis is done, they can either continue to phase three, phase four, those kind of things, or they just open label it. Means they just announce it to everybody. So this is what this particular patient was taking, and that is used for analysis purposes. Or there could be much more complex mixed phase doses or multi-arm multi-stage MAM studies. We will come to that, but most of the times these multi-arm multi-phase clinical trials, they have this predefined interim analysis at multiple stages. In case of phase one, phase two, there are at least one or two, but in case of MAMS there will be multiple stages. And then adaptive decision making, that is one of the common things in adaptive decision making. As the clinical trial protocol is going on, see what happens is, once you start the clinical trial, you got to start the clinical trial using a clinical trial protocol. That is the standard document, and you are going to stick to the T of it. You are not going to change anything from the clinic in the clinical trial protocol. You are going to stick to it, get the data, get out. But most of the times what happens is, there would be unforeseen circumstances in which you got to make some changes. Sometimes you feel that, hey, this doesn't actually matter too much. Maybe we saw that, okay, as the patient is taking the treatment, there are some abnormal liver parameters, and I want to include one extra liver test in the clinical trial protocol. But if you are sticking to the standard method, you will not be able to do that. You have to do a protocol amendment and then train everybody who is associated with the clinical trial with the protocol amendment. So those kind of issues are there. So that is why here what you do is adaptive decision making, wherein as you go with the flow, you got to change the clinical trial protocol. You can change the clinical trial protocol, improve it, as long as you are keeping the clinical patient safety as the priority, and at the same time you are keeping everybody in the loop who is going to do the analysis, and they need to agree to the clinical trial adaptive decision making design. So these are some of the things that I wanted to talk about in the mixed phase trial. And what are the latest developments that are happening?
So we
Uh,
have about 10 minutes left. I just wanted to give you a reminder.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So in case of latest development that we know, I have listed few of them, but majorly we have seen three or four of them. One of them I have already talked to you about. That's the master protocol. Means you don't want to submit multiple protocols to the regulatory agencies. One is MAMS, as I already told, multi-arm, multi-stage. And then there is something called basket trial, where you have a common genetic mutation, that common genetic mutation or a biomarker, and that common genetic mutation or biomarker could be present in multiple different types of diseases. But and then you have a same intervention that happens for the same. So for say HER2 mutation of the breast cancer, prostate, and different types of cancer, only one HER2 mutation. So your treatment is targeting HER2 mutation. HER2 mutation could be present in multiple different kinds of diseases. So multiple different kinds of diseases will come together under one. So that kind of things is called basket trial. And it kind of decreases the cost of developing the clinical trial. Another is umbrella trial, wherein you have treatment specific genetic mutations, and you have personalized medicine. So same, you will take one disease, but that same disease might have multiple different kinds of genetic mutations, and for each particular treatment you will have a specific genetic mutation. So you can combine all of them under one, and then you do a umbrella trial. You have then platform trials, where you are disease focused. You are not focused on say either a drug or a particular genetic mutation. You are disease focused, and whatever is needed for that particular disease. You can take say Duchenne muscular dystrophy platform trial. I have multiple things. I have a steroid. I have some sort of gene therapy or other things. I can put all of them, take the patients, put them in different group, and then just follow them from that, and then see which particular intervention is much useful. So those are platform trials. Especially for large disorders, I think platform trials would definitely be helpful. Another thing that we are constantly seeing now, constantly hearing now, is about the decentralization of the clinical trial. See, most of these clinical trials are very rigid. Where are you doing the intervention? Who is the investigator? What are their qualifications? Where they are, where the patient is coming? Everything is fixed. Whatever is there in the protocol, you got to kind of do that in the exact manner. But decentralized clinical trial kind of breaks that silo. That is how we are, right? I mean, we can now join the office through any type of you know, mobile phone. Wherever we are, we can do work from home. All these kind of things have happened, and COVID kind of really changed that. Patients actually couldn't visit the clinical trial site. All the clinical investigator were interested in is to just understand what is happening to the outcome measures. So it is possible to gather this particular data by not coming to the clinical trial site. So that is the concept of decentralized clinical trials. And another thing that we are hearing is about the patient focused drug development. So the issue is about what to treat. When we were working with spinal cord injury patients, so all the able body people thought that okay, spinal cord injury patients need to be provided methods so that they can get up and walk. But then when we actually interviewed the patients who had spinal cord injury, their first complaint was, I want to urinate by myself. So that was their thing. That was their requirement. So they wanted independence in passing urine, not take somebody's help. Because that was the thing. Or they used to have urinary tract infections very often. So those were the interventions they were seeing. So these we wouldn't get unless we are in their shoe. We don't understand what they require. So this is called target identification, and it is very specifically used for rare disease patients as well. So there is something that is the one of the core concepts of patient focused drug development. And we are hearing now electronic clinical outcome assessments. So outcome assessments previously, people used to do only clinician based outcome assessments. The patient used to come to the clinical trial site, and then they had some methodology in collecting the data. But it is now possible using collect the same thing through an electronic measurement, and different people can collect it now. The patient themselves can report it, or clinicians themselves can do it, or some observer who is doing, if the patient is very small or not able to provide the data, observer can do it on. And then there could also be standardized task or performance outcomes that can be used. So these are some of the latest developments. Apart from that, electronic consent has also come. That is another thing that is coming. But there are issues, especially adoption of the same thing in India. um, And the next 5 minutes, I'll probably rush through. I probably won't go through the AI in the clinical trial in very detail. But what I want to tell you is that artificial intelligence and machine learning in the drug development, it can contribute to multiple different areas of the drug development, particularly in clinical research. I say that it is possible with the help of AI algorithms. It is possible to actually now address some of the issues of the rare disease per se. Say, for example, recruitment, where to recruit the patient, selection of the patient, stratification of the trial documents, because it is possible to now, as a human, it is not possible to go through huge amount of electronic data which is captured in insurance, in the electronic medical health records. Huge amount of data is there. It is not possible to humanly do that. But with artificial intelligence, you can actually capture, you can know where are these patients located, and it helps in recruitment and selection and stratification. It is also possible to do an appropriate dose or dose regimen optimization with because you would have put the data from very different kind of drugs, right? And some drugs have shared classes, some drugs come in some particular classes, so you know that if that particular class of drug has this much amount of dose, what could be the potential dose or dose optimization regimen that we can do for here. In case of patients themselves, artificial intelligence, you can have chatbots, or you can have some sort of methods of interacting with the patients, and it will help in adherence and retention of the patients in the study. Otherwise they would leave the study. They think they are not getting improvement or something like that. Those, if it is very obvious, you can actually prevent them leaving the study. So it would help in retention and adherence of the patients into the study. Site selection, again, it's the same thing, where you know that if there is a huge chunk of rare disease patients which are present in one particular area, one particular doctor, depending on your insurance data, depending on your electronic medical record data, definitely available with a large amount of CROs, we can they can come up with a much better site selection criteria. And clinical trial data collection, management and analysis, again, definitely with the help of artificial intelligence, you are able to look at more hidden trends. You are able to look at you are able to look at data in a much more newer manner. And endpoint assessment, sometimes known endpoints, sometimes unknown endpoints also can be uncovered with the help of clinical trials. And of course, ultimately, the artificial intelligence and machine learning in clinical trial would help in improving the design, analysis, and it will help the operational efficiency. And we expect that overall the focus would come back to the patients. And there is a huge amount of information that is there, but at the end of it, it is the same thing. We expect that there would be a fair access to the drug, and faster recruitment and positive impact, because at the end of the day, rare disease is costly. Rare disease drug development is costly. So you want to decrease as many parameters as possible. If there is a faster recruitment, positive impact on the study startup time, study duration, the overall money you are going to spend in the clinical trial is going to decrease, and we expect that would translate into a lesser cost. And as I said, we can actually enrich the patients who are getting into the study. And high risk individuals, you can actually stratify as the study is progressing. Maybe this particular patient might get into a much more severe adverse event, so we need to actually monitor them closely. All this kind of information, it is possible to get from the artificial intelligence. And as I also already said, monitor the investigational medicinal product intake. These things are there for adherence. Regular alerts you can produce. These are all digital interventions that are happening. And AI chatbot and proactive retention and trial participation assistance. These are different other things that one can do. But these are the study design and conduct. What are the different advantages that AI will offer? In case of study design optimization, it will provide much better study design, reduce protocol amendments, reduce protocol development time. For site selection and PI selection, high recruitment, high retention, optimize strategies for enrollment and startup gap. So faster startup, faster first patient enrollment to last patient intake. So that would decrease the study time, the amount of money that is spent. the site performance you can actually evaluate, you can actually do a much more real-time analysis and take a appropriate decision which site to shut down, which site to keep going. And overall better safety one can provide with digital health technologies and faster access to actionable insights. um, I think but there are some challenges with AI. This is an important slide. One major issue is the transparency, because AI algorithm is kind of we don't know what AI algorithm does unless one actually discloses the code behind it. So it's essential that it is properly communicated to the regulators and all the stakeholders. And one needs to look at the level of autonomy that is provided to the AI algorithm, when to do the human intervention. You cannot leave everything to AI. One needs to know when the human intervention should happen during the protocol. If the AI gets involved too much, then there needs to be accountability through audit trail, because currently the clinical trial data is mainly managed by the humans. And if we are doing a login, if we are doing some data change or anything, everything is documented. So for AI also, one needs to have an appropriate accountability through the audit trail. And in case of data issues, there will be bias in design, development and deployment, because there are, I mean, I mean, if you just put some AI search, there will be bias in the way the pictures actually come for your search queries, because the data is actually fed by humans, right? And there is a systematical, statistical, computational biases are there. One needs to address it appropriately. That is why indigenous AI algorithm, or making the AI much more diverse and useful for all different types of population, is essential. One needs to ensure that data integrity, ownership of the data trail, because once it becomes AI, I mean, who is giving the data to whom and who owns that particular data? That is a question even now itself, right? I mean, we have been giving data to all these different companies, so we actually don't know who actually owns the data, and whether there will be any useful comebacks to the people who actually provided the data to them. And what are the consequences of the wrong decision? For humans, at least there are some consequences. What are the consequences for the wrong decision for AI in clinical trial? That is an open question that needs to be addressed. So all these thing that we actually do for clinical trial is also for the patients who are admitted to different places. They are asking for different kind of treatment. They care for the rare, and they are always you know, it takes a village to raise a child, and it also essential that a lot of clinical trial people who get involved in clinical trial, they also understand this, that a lot more stakeholders are there. So there needs to be more responsibility while working with the patients, and also definitely a little bit of respect and is also needed when working with the patient advocacy organization, because they have the lived experience. So better respect that particular lived experience instead of putting our experience on them. And that is why it is essential that we provide the clinical trial for the rare disease patients in a more comprehensive manner, where awareness is there for the clinical trials for the rare disease patients. It is diagnosed at appropriately, not when the disease has completely burnt out and the clinical trial cannot be provided to them all. Access to the clinical trial treatments, and when the clinical trial becomes successful, the treatment also should be available. It should not be like clinical trial is done here and the drug goes somewhere else and the patient here are left with nothing. That shouldn't also not happen. People who are doing the clinical trial here ensure that they have some future plans for the market authorization applications in India as well, and appropriate management of the patients. So any questions I'll take now.
Right, sir. So thank you so much, Dr. Rao, for that incredibly insightful and comprehensive talk. You've demystified the complexities of clinical trials and also given us a clear view of both the foundational elements and the exciting frontiers for development. And especially like in the rare disease area, because I have been wondering that because these rare disease patients, they are usually a very small and a heterogeneous population. So I think it must be very challenging to have clinical trials for rare diseases. So,
Yeah, it's a challenging thing, but at the same time it provides an opportunity to understand, to push the frontiers without compromising the data. See, science is non-compromising. We should not compromise on science, but at the same time we should also understand from a human perspective what are we actually fighting for.
True, sir. True. So we are taking questions now. So in the chat box, we have a few questions. Ms. Lakshmi Vasudevan is asking, is there any phase 3 clinical trial for Pitt-Hopkins syndrome?
Pitt
If
Hopkins, I
so,
think I
please.
did a study. I do not have it on the back of my head right
So
now, but
I had looked it up, sir. There is the phase 2 clinical trial was there of some NNZ 2591. So basically it's but it's still, so they are still planning phase 3, but I think it's still not I mean there are no recruitments happening as such for phase 3 presently.
okay. But the data is available on the clinicaltrials.gov. Everybody can search
So
for it.
only right, sir.
Hmm.
So I
And
think
the government of India, one request I will say, the government of India wants to also update the CTRI website. It has asked for people to provide their comments how to update the CTRI website. So please, if you want to improve the way the clinical trial data is presented to the community in India, please provide your comments to CTRI
yes, sir.
ICMR.
Right, sir. Right, sir. That's an useful piece of information, sir. There is another question. If there is a criteria for phase 3 trial to include a patient above 4 years, but I have a patient below 4 years, then is there any chance to include a patient in trial who is below 4 years under early access program?
Uh, That's a very specific question. See, early access is when when the work is still happening on the drug development, and you have a drug which has been developed for a very serious or life threatening disease, and there is no substitute for that particular drug in the clinical trial, right? So that is where with limited amount of safety, it will be made available to a widespread use while the drug is still under the process. It has still not attained the market authorization. Now early access use is completely what I would say. We have something like right to try, expanded access, and all these things. It would require approval from the regulatory agencies and ethics committee. Based on how nicely your case is made to them, it might be possible to get access to that, but it all depends on whether that particular access is going to change the seriousness or life-threatening condition of that patient. But remember that most of the times early access has nothing to do with the clinical trial per se. Clinical trial will go on by itself, but you have heard about that particular drug, it seems to be useful, and you have a condition which is serious and life-threatening, so you want to make a case to the company, you want to make a case to the ethics committee, you want to make a case to the regulatory agencies to give you an early access even before the drug actually comes to the market. So it all depends on how you make your case to these three stakeholders. I am not hearing you.
Sorry. So, sir, they are asking for SRT for Tay-Sachs, actually. The child is having Tay-Sachs disease.
So
The one.
that is what I mean. I explained. This is the whole point. I understand it's a very Tay-Sachs is a very difficult disorder, especially when the seizure starts coming in. It becomes very difficult to actually manage. But then early access is all about how we make the case for that. But at the end of the day, if the drug is approved by the FDA, India has already allowed. If the drug is allowed approved by FDA, India has already allowed to import it on patient name.
And so there is another question. Are clinical trials completed for Trikafta medicine used for cystic fibrosis in the Indian population?
Indian population, that is the trifecta. I am not quite sure. These are very specific questions.
Right, sir.
Uh,
These we'll have to look up
I,
in
I,
the.
I, yeah. I mean, I can definitely get back with this. I mean, we can. Chetna can probably note down who is asking these questions. We can probably get back to that. Get back to them with more specific answers.
Right, sir. Right, sir. So
Surname.
overall, so where do you see India headed, like for like can it someday become a hub of clinical trials for rare diseases?
See, number one is for that to happen, two things are needed. One is we need to have a very strong clinical trial network. The foundations have already been put. ICMR has started doing um, the clinical trial network. They have started doing that. So that is there. And AIIMS, AIIMS Guwahati also, they have started doing some rare disease clinical trial network. So once the networks are there, it should be much easier to get the patients for clinical trial site. There will be some requirements for standardization and accreditation of those particular sites to ensure that the sites are as expected from the regulatory authorities. That is number one. And number two is we should be able to get the drugs now in India. Without drugs coming for a clinical trial, it becomes much difficult. But however, I think the advocacy should be pushed towards including India as one of the trials for global clinical trials. See, most of the times, all these clinical trial companies, all these sponsor companies, they would want to include one or two different sites outside USA. Most of these are happening in USA only, but they do regularly involve sites from Middle East, sites from Europe. So why not include a site from India as well? For that, one needs to have an advocacy to make sure that global clinical trials do include India. There was a recent study done, and a lot of the global clinical trials, they were excluding India, especially when it comes to rare disease trials. That should not happen. For that, to actually for to make the case, we again, this is more like a chicken and egg situation, but still India has already, ICMR has already started. We do have the clinical trial plan, at least clinical trial plans for the rare diseases. So different sites will be created throughout India, and those sites, then we have to use the advocacy to make sure that global India gets included in the global clinical trials, so that the trials start happening in these places. Apart from this, trials are already happening. Sarepta trials happened in India.
Right.
Multiple other gene therapy trials also happened in India. um, um, Places like Arvind Eye Hospital, Shankar Eye Hospital, and AIIMS, of course, Chandigarh, all these places, individual clinical trials are happening. This is all based on the connections of the investigator with the companies. But from a system perspective, it is possible to actually have a much better solution rather than these kind of individual
Abs-
solutions.
Right. So, Pooja Mahajan is asking, how can parents approach for clinical trials outside of India? Like say in USA, their son is diagnosed with INAD, with a mutation
Uh,
proven.
INAD is a interesting disease. I think they are already developing a gene therapy trial. I remember INAD. They were trying to develop some gene therapy for INAD, and the issue of the, if you have patients going outside of the India, it's not a major issue from a regulatory perspective. There is nobody stopping you from actually going there. The issue is that they will not recruit, because as I told you, you cannot be charged for clinical trial, right? So a patient cannot be charged. That means the sponsor should be willing to actually accommodate your charges to be there. So depending on the financial capability of the sponsor, some people can do, some people cannot do. I have heard of cases where people in Netherlands, when they were asked to they were looking for some patients, and the patient was found in India. The Indian patients are now going there as they get recruited into the clinical trial. Of course, they will not probably take care their entire travel or anything. The patient parents themselves were willing to relocate to Netherlands, and the site is saying that, okay, if you are here in Netherlands, why not get enrolled into the study? So these kind of things are there. But getting the patient all the way to the clinical trial site might or might not work. But I did hear a long time back, around 3 4 years back, there was a we were some CROs or some clinical trial company was looking for some patients, and they were even ready to fund the patient travel from here to Australia for a rare disease case. But these are all very anecdotal. It does not generally happen, because at the end of the day, it is money. There is money involved in conducting the trial, and if the money is sufficient to recruit international patients, they should recruit without any issue.
So there is one question about the role of patient advocacy groups in clinical trials, especially in the Indian context.
Yeah, that is the very important question, because at the end of the day, it is the patient advocacy groups who have to do all the hard work actually. Because the first is they will ask where is the patient, how many patients are there. So it is our duty to kind of go and find out where these patients are, gather them. I remember when when gene therapy was being offered in India as a a philanthropic basis. It was ORDI who was working overdrive with all our volunteers, Madan and other people, getting all of those people. All the patients were coming. Everybody was screened. We worked with diagnostic agencies to provide a much cheaper diagnostic test to ensure that inclusion exclusion criteria. They had a huge list of inclusion exclusion criteria. All those things somebody should know. No, one pediatric neurologist is sitting and they are evaluating from the clinical perspective, but the background work also needs to be done. So patient advocacy groups only did. So we it is important that one is we need to push more in terms of understanding our disease in a much more better way. Work with the organizations, or work with a much more umbrella organizations. Don't try to put yourself in a silos. I would request you guys not to do that, because together we are much more stronger. By individual it is much easier to break us. We should all get together, and this is a common thing. For every single rare disease it is the same thing, right? The concepts of concepts are same. It could be rare disease A, rare disease B, but at the end of the day they will ask where is the natural history, where is the registry for this. So it is essential that we all come together and solve our common issues. That is number one. So first is there needs to be unity among all the rare disease patient advocacy groups. We all should come together under one umbrella organization. You can come under ORDI. If there are other umbrella organizations, join them, but try to be together. Don't try to solve your problem just by yourself. That is not going to be helpful for a lot, because if the numbers are more, they will do their job and they will go away, but that is not how it works. There are a lot of other rare diseases, 15 patients, 20 patients. What about them? What are they going to do? So we should fight for everybody's cause. That is number one. Number two is we should work with government I mean, we should ensure that it is we ask from the government what they are doing. National policy for rare disease has already come. Where is the newborn screening? Because once you get newborn screening, it is much easier to get genetic diagnosis. Or what about genetic insurance for genetic diagnosis? There are a lot of other questions that we need to ask, because if we create this particular data points only, then only the registries or natural history of the disease is going to be useful. We cannot have some general generic outcomes that this is the disease, what are you going to do, this is the disease. We need to make it very attractive for different companies to use the data which is already there. Of course, you are the owner of the data. You work how you decide how you work with the data, but at the same time it cannot be business as usual. You also need to ensure that the data is there which is more palatable, and at the same time the data should make business sense, the data should make clinical sense, the data should make sense to develop the drug. So that will come only when all of you guys put together and work and ask from the government in terms of how is the, I mean, we need to keep on asking what is happening to the rare disease clinical trial network that government has put out. What happened to Nidan Kendras? What happened to the what happened to the centers of excellence? How many clinical trials have they done so far? How many clinical trials have they given the patient to? We need to start asking questions. Only when it is possible to actually push the envelope a little bit, and then we can get a much better view. Of course, on a grand scale, a large different kinds of things need to be done, but ground level work somebody should do. No, if everybody keeps on doing big things, who is going to do the small things? Small things are the one which do the changes.
Very true, sir. So I think there are more questions coming, but we are falling short of time. So I'm going to leave an email address and a contact number where you can ask more questions, and we can revert to you. We can discuss with sir and revert to you. And on this insightful note, I would like to thank our brilliant Dr. Sudheendra Rao for sharing that invaluable experience today. I would also like to express my deep gratitude to ORDI for providing this excellent and vital platform for continuous learning. And finally, a big thank you to our audience for your attentive participation and thoughtful questions. Your presence and curiosity are what make these discussions truly impactful. Okay, so have a wonderful evening. I'm just mentioning this in the QA section too, the email address and the contact number. Yes. So for those who are still on, the contact number is 8891 555 000. Okay, 8891 555 000. And the email address is info@ordindia.in. info@ordindia.in. Okay, so we'll get back to you. It was really a very interesting session, sir. Lots of questions coming.
Questions
So
will
I
be
think
there.
it sparked a huge
Yeah.
discussion here.
Yeah.
Wonderful, sir.
It's
Thank you
good
so
that
much.
once they understand the concept, they will start discussing also. Thank you so
Exactly.
much, Prasanna. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Kshitija.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.